Page 94, the Private Eye Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Page 94. My name is Andrew Hunter-Murray, and this week we are going to be talking about lagoons in Wales, as well as trying not to be sued by the reclusive and elusive Barclay brothers who own the Telegraph. But first, Private Eye has written for some years about the prospect of a tidal lagoon energy project in Wales. This was going to be a huge green energy project, and in the last couple of weeks it's just been cancelled by the government, who've said that they are not going to provide a guarantee for it. Now, this sounds like a bad thing. Actually, Private Eye has been campaigning against this project for a number of years on a number of grounds. Now, the first person who we would have liked to talk to about this is our correspondent Old Sparky, who writes about energy. However, Old Sparky is one of the correspondents whose identity is so secretive and so highly prized that even to give away what their voice sounds like would compromise their identity fatally. Happily, one of our other correspondents, Sarah Shannon, has also been writing about the Tidal Lagoon project, and she was willing to throw anonymity to the wind and talk to us about the lagoon and some of the characters involved in the proposal. So I started off by asking her what this Tidal Lagoon was actually going to be.
So it was a project to harness tidal energy by building a sort of 6-mile breakwater with great big pieces of rock in Swansea Bay, and then allowing that lagoon to fill with water at high tide, and then letting it rush out again through turbines, creating electricity. It sounds like a brilliant plan.
It sounds wonderful.
Yes, instead of burning all that coal, we can just harness the power of the moon, which sounds pretty magical to me.
Why would anyone want to cancel this magical moon-powered, tidal, free energy project?
It was massively, prohibitively expensive.
Okay.
To give you some idea, the Lagoon Company wanted the government to guarantee it £168 per megawatt hour, that's how it's measured, for its electricity. And compare that with the market price today of electricity, which is £42 per megawatt hour.
Oh, okay, so that really is quite a lot more.
And that's the difference that the government would have had to have made up. When I say the government, I actually mean bill payers, people that pay their electricity bills.
Okay.
And of course, there's a huge amount of scrutiny about our electricity bills and how much they cost, and quite rightly so, and we're always campaigning to keep them down and electricity companies not to get away with overly high profits. So this project with such massive costs just wasn't really acceptable.
It's kind of incredible that the idea was ever given any credence if the cost is 4 times the market rate. You can understand projects costing a bit more, I suppose, or electricity costing a bit more,
yes,
if it's very renewable. So
yes,
there are subsidies, aren't there, for
we're used to things, yes, there are subsidies, and that's what they're for, to support projects that we think are a good thing, like renewables, like wind, like solar. But last September, we had our first ever solar farm that wasn't supported by a public subsidy. So things are moving that way.
I think a lot of listeners might not be fully familiar with the way it works. So as far as I understand it, you go to the government, and if they like the idea of your tidal lagoon, let's say, they will give you a contract saying, we guarantee that we will buy energy from you at this price X, for a set number of years. And that is what allows you to say to your investors, look, give me the money to build this tidal lagoon. I've got this cast iron guarantee from the government that we will be paid. And that's the only way it can be done. Is that right?
That's right. So the government is going to guarantee you a price for your electricity. It's called a contract for differences. And if the market price falls below that guaranteed price, the government or the bill payers make up that difference.
Okay.
And the way that the tidal lagoon people tried to make it more palatable was that they sort of stretched out their contract so that over many, many years it would become cheaper. But they wanted a contract of 60 years. In fact, sometimes even 90-year contract was mentioned. And wind farms usually get a 15-year contract.
Okay.
So you can see the huge disparity. And Hinkley Point, which up until then had been the benchmark for really expensive, you're taking the mickey sort of electricity prices, that was asking for a 35-year contract. And its prices were going to be £92 per megawatt hour. So when Hinkley Point starts to look like a bargain, that's when alarm bells start ringing. And the other problem with the Lagoon project was that there was no tender for it. So these contract for differences are usually really hard fought over. There are auctions, and people, have to try and make their tender as competitive as possible. But Tidal Lagoon Swansea Bay Limited came along and wanted the contract for differences given to them with no other bidders at the highest ever price we've ever seen for the longest period of time we've ever seen. And that, to the eye and hopefully to our readers, didn't seem like a fair prospect.
I'm now starting to wonder how it lasted for several years as a viable project
yes,
with all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Can I just check one thing? What is attractive to the government about saying that's a really high price for electricity for 30 years, so could you possibly provide it at that price for 90 years? Is the idea that energy prices are only going to go up and over time it'll come in line with what we're paying?
I think the government wasn't really the one that was suggesting the longer contract.
Okay.
It was the Tidal Lagoon Company, and it's a bit like the grounds of stretching your mortgage over many years. It seems cheaper, but if you add up what you're actually paying, it gives you bad dreams. So.
Yeah.
So the important thing about getting this government guaranteed price was that it would make the project incredibly appealing to investors. Can you imagine a guaranteed profit for 90 years? I mean, that's like gold dust to any sort of investment fund. And they were definitely circling, and some had tentatively invested, but they were waiting for the government to give it the go-ahead before they supported it.
Yeah.
But he needed the money, that he being Mark Shorrock, the head of Tidal Lagoon Swansea Bay.
Yes, we're going to speak a bit more about him in a bit, I think.
He needed the investors to stump up the initial costs, which for a tidal lagoon are enormous. They started in 2014, he quoted £900 million for the project. By the time it was axed, it had risen to £1.3 billion.
Okay.
So you can see that the figures are sort of on the same shifting sands that the tidal lagoon would be built on. They moved around a lot, and, £1.3 billion today, who knows what that might have been in 2 more years' time.
Yeah. Some people have criticised the cancellation of this thing, saying, it's a real shame that this green project has been cancelled.
Well, other renewable energies are coming down in price, and wind farm costs are coming down and down. And there's excitement in the renewables industry, but do we need to pay this enormous sum for something that could be a very expensive white elephant?
Yeah, but just think of it. Maybe 20 years from now, every bay in the country would have a massive tidal lagoon and we get all our energy for free. Is it realistic? You're looking at me like it's not realistic.
Not really. I mean, the problem with tidal energy is that it only happens 4 times a day with 2 high tides and 2 low tides. It doesn't provide you with what people in the energy industry call base load generation. And if they put those lagoons around our coast, with the best will in the world, you wouldn't be able to get enough electricity to switch on your kettle any time of the day. So it's only ever going to be another type of energy to add into more reliable ones.
Yeah.
But it also had lots of issues that hadn't really been addressed, like, a lagoon would most probably fill with sediment fairly quickly and need lots of clearing out.
Yeah.
It also has big effects on marine life and bird life. And in the Charles Hendry's report into it, the people like the RSPB and nature lobbies spoke about their concerns about the effect on the local ecology in Swansea.
Can I just check I've got it right? The idea is you carve out millions of tons of rock and you then take them from wherever you've carved them out. You then pile them up in the mouth of a bay, and as the water flows in and out?
Well, actually, they needed to build a 6-mile wall of rock.
6 miles?
Yes. So there was an enormous amount of rock required. And where that could have come from is another issue that I has written about.
This is something that you've written about,
yes,
isn't it?
That's
so
right.
Where was the rock going to come from?
Well, the plan was Mark Shorrock also owned a company called Shire Oak Quarries, which had bought a disused quarry in the very beautiful Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall called Dean Quarry. It was near a little village called St Kevin, and he was going to get his rock from there, and he wanted to take it out by ship and ship it to Swansea.
Okay.
But this caused quite some ructions in Cornwall where they weren't very happy. St Kevin is an area of outstanding natural beauty. It's a site of special scientific interest. The Manacles, which is the coastal area off there, is a marine conservation zone.
Oh God, it's got nothing going for it in quarry terms.
It's about as idyllic a place and unspoilt a place as you can get. Its local economy depends on tourism. People walking along the southwest coastal path, they would have had to have been stopped as the blasts were made. However often they were made, the blasts would have stopped the people walking along the path. They've also got companies like Roskilly's Farm, which makes organic ice cream, was next door to the quarry with its herd of Jersey cows. And all the noise and pollution was not going to help people like them. And also the Cornish Sea Salt Company was very close by as well. So all these places that depended on a clean environment were very upset about the idea of an enormous amount of quarrying going on.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. So the man we've been talking about, Mark Shorrock, he was the man bidding for the Tidal Lagoon, and he's the man who owns this disused quarry, which he wants to reopen.
Yes.
That in itself is quite odd, isn't it? Because normally these bids for enormous energy contracts from the government, they're done by huge firms like EDF or whoever it might be.
Yes.
And Mark Shorrock's company is kind of a one-man band, or it's not an enormous energy provider.
That's right. So Mark Shorrock's company, Shire Oak Quarries, says that it has a reverence for nature at the heart of what we do, but the locals in St Kevin didn't feel that was really coming across when he said he wanted to dig all this rock out. Don't get me wrong, they weren't against a quarry opening there. It was just the sheer volume that he was planning to take out, and the jetties that he was going to need to build to accommodate the ships that would be taking the rock away, a breakwater that would have to be built. And this was all going to be built in a marine conservation zone. So Mark Shorrock and his people went down to St Kevin and had a sort of village hall meeting with them,
right,
which became very heated. I think it may have entered local folklore by now. A local lad there said to them that he'd read that they'd done a survey on the disruption to marine life. And he asked them how long it had taken, and they said, well, we did a 2-day survey and we've worked out, it's minimal harm will be caused. And he said, oh, well, that's funny. I just did my GCSE survey and it took 3 days. So shortly after that, a company, an organisation called Sea Search released its survey of the marine life around there. And it had taken 14 years to do that survey. And it had found all kinds of special habitats and species that would be directly affected by the building of these big loading jetties. So the idea of this very green, friendly, renewable energy guy actually sort of spoiling a local ecology there was something that the eye found hard to marry up.
Got 14 years for that for the proper survey.
That's right, yes. It takes a lot of divers to find all those pink sea fans and special anemones that they found down there. So
that's extraordinary. Okay, so locals were against it.
Yes.
And the survey done by Tidal Lagoon Swansea Bay, the company at the heart of all this, is called into question.
And now, by the way, Tidal Lagoon Swansea Bay is distancing itself from the whole Cornish quarry idea. I think it's been terrible PR for them, and they say that they're not necessarily going to dig out their rock from there at all. But it had all the two things had until then been linked to local campaigners in their mind. Their rock was going to be used to build the lagoon.
Now, there's another word I've got written in my notes here, which is the word inducement.
Aha.
Can you tell me anything more about that?
At a government select committee last month, Mark Shorrock was asked by one of the committee members if his company had offered a financial inducement to the St Kevin Parish Council to support his planning permission for the quarry. And he gave that a flat denial, and the committee moved on. But in the next edition of The Eye, we explained the history behind that rather strange exchange. And that history was that Mark Shorrock and Shire Oak Quarries had drawn up an agreement with the parish council which had offered them a substantial 6-figure sum as a community fund.
Right.
And the amount would depend on how much rock got dug out. But it was looking quite a lot for a little village council to be receiving. But then later a clause was inserted which said that the parish council must give its support to Shire Oak for the quarry planning permission and not try to fight it. And if they did try to fight it, the agreement would be terminated. So listeners to this podcast can decide if they think that's a financial inducement or not.
Another very curious aspect of this whole thing is to do with Mr. Shorrock's wife, and her name is Juliet Davenport. She runs another green energy company. It's called Good Energy, and Good Energy was an investor in the Tidal Lagoon project.
That's right, yes.
But there are a couple of weird conditions.
So this is a publicly listed company that engaged Mark Shorrock as a consultant and paid him, well, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of fees. But it also then invested £500,000 in Mrs. Shorrock's husband's project. And for this, it got an option of 10% of the electricity at market price. But since anyone can buy something at market price, this seemed valueless. But what it did also get at Good Energy was what's called a comprehensive charge on the Lagoon Company's assets, which meant that if the Lagoon Company failed, Good Energy got first dibs on the assets. So it was very unlikely to lose that £500,000. But that's not an arrangement that was likely to have pleased other investors as they joined the party.
So there's a very long list of reasons, effectively, why this lagoon is not happening. Is it definitely not going to happen? Do we know? Does it seem very unlikely?
I think it seems highly unlikely because there's no practical way that Shorrock's going to get the costs down. The costs of other renewables are falling all the time, as we mentioned. Perhaps the Welsh Government could step in and offer its own contract for differences to guarantee the price of electricity for the tidal lagoon. But how are they going to pay for that? Do Welsh electricity users have to pay for that? Would they be happy with that? Welsh people have been largely behind it, but Mark Shorrock did used to be a PR man, and he did a really good PR job in Wales. I mean, they really tugged at the heartstrings. The slogan for the tidal lagoon was "Ours to Own," which gave, a wonderful glow. But did the ordinary punter really own anything except the bill that they'd receive on their doormat? I don't think they did. So we're talking about electricity that's probably 4 or 5 times more expensive than current market prices. So I think Mark Shorrock's only hope is a new government, really. Perhaps Jeremy Corbyn might view it all more favourably.
Well, there you go. If you see a man trying to sell you a tidal lagoon with only one careful owner, be very careful indeed. Sarah Shannon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And a special thank you once again to Old Sparky for his or her correspondence on the matter over the last few years. Now, the last issue of the Eye had a story about the Barclay brothers, the eccentric billionaires who own the Telegraph, as well as quite a lot of other stuff, but who, despite being media moguls, are very unwilling to have any scrutiny whatsoever of their own lives or business activities. Private Eye has been committed to correcting this oversight by the rest of the press over the last few years, and in the last issue we covered their attempts to silence someone who had written mildly disobliging things about them, first on a blog and secondly on a car. Here is Francis Wheen with the full story.
Well, I first met this character, whose real name is Craig Tuck, though for some reason he prefers to be known as Lord de Chanson. About a year or so ago, I came into the Private Eye office very early one morning, as is my work, about 7 a.m, 7:30. We try and work hard for Lord Nome. He's a hard taskmaster. And there, parked in the street outside the building, was a very strange car, covered in very artfully done headlines and slogans insulting the Barclay brothers, who own the Telegraph newspapers, and it was full of things, accusations about their tax affairs, their business affairs, just festooned with them. It looked like it was a racing car, covered with sponsors' logos, except all the sponsors' logos were yet another possibly defamatory comment about the Barclay twins. And he was driving around London in this car and decided parking it outside Private Eye might be an idea. So I took some pictures of it and sent him on his way. I also discovered from a friend that he'd been parking it in Millionaires Row up in North London, that Bishop's Avenue, where lots of millionaires live, because he thought that might cause some trouble among the sort of class of people that the Barclays mix with tycoons, that they might upset them. He was clearly angling for them to pursue him. I mean, he was angling from angling thirsting for a worsting, all that sort of thing, aiming for a maiming. And he got it, because he, for several years now, for almost 10 years, I think, this chap has been putting up little websites saying, I am going to write a biography of the Barclay brothers, exposing all their shenanigans over the years. Do send me any material you've got. But mainly, he doesn't even ask for material. He just says, I'm going to write a biography. I've got lots of material.
Okay.
But he then disappears and turns up on a new website a year or two later, and he's very obviously just a sort of lone oddball, and the promised biography never appears, and clearly is never going to appear. But nevertheless, for some reason, Sir David Barclay, one of the twins, decided a couple of years ago to... Well, first of all, he went to court in Paris, because the Barclays, as British newspaper owners, clearly think English law is inadequate for their purposes in suppressing comments about them. So they prefer to use the French courts whenever, because French law on things like privacy is much more severe. So, I mean, they've got a record here. They are in the mid-1990s, I think, they sued John Burt when he was BBC Director General. And it was over a little interview on Radio Guernsey, BBC Radio Guernsey, that the journalist John Sweeney had done, and they took exception to this. So instead of complaining to the BBC, they went to the High Court in Paris, demanding that John Burt be imprisoned for this grave thing. They sued the Times for criminal libel in Paris a few years ago over a 300-word news story, which they took exception to. I mean, that's how strange their litigation mania is.
So there's form.
So there's form of going to court in Paris initially, because they think they get a better deal in Paris. I mean, over here, the courts might possibly say, well, you are sort of figures of public interest as billionaire owners of national newspapers. You can't just suppress any mention of you in the media. But in Paris, they get a rather better deal. And sure enough, in Paris, they used a new French law, part of the penal code, which came into force 4 years ago, and it's an offence of mental harassment through public online communication. And so that's what David Barclay sued this chap over. I mean, he didn't sue for libel or anything like that. He didn't say the claims on this website are untrue. He just said, or his lawyer said on his behalf, Sir David is a vulnerable individual, of all things, and he is being mentally harassed by these web posts, these blogs, and the blogs have been affecting and unsettling Barclay, so he has developed a reactive anxiodepressive syndrome.
Well, this sounds very serious.
Well, it does sound very serious, and obviously one doesn't want to make light of people's mental problems, but the question does arise, why does this billionaire Barclay twin sitting in his castle on the island of Brecou, why does he feel obliged to keep reading this silly little blog if it's giving him anxiodepressive syndrome? Could he not just go and watch some kitten pictures like anyone else? It is very odd that he's compelled to this odd little blog.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he went to court in Paris, got a judgment in his favour that this was mental harassment by online communication, little blog, upset him. Then went to the court in the High Court in London to get it converted into an English High Court order and have it enforced over here, because the Lord de Champsaur by then was living in England. I mean, he used to live in Sark. This is how this whole thing started. He's one of the many people from Sark who took against the Barclay twins, because they live on this sort of fortress on a neighbouring rock, and they're always making enemies in Sark, to put it at its lightest.
We've covered them before, I think, on this podcast.
Before, yes. So anyway, so the High Court in London then said the order could be enforced. And then the bloke, Lord de Champsaur, was surprisingly cooperative. I mean, given how obsessive he is, I was quite surprised that he agreed to do anything, but he did. He tried to take down these blogs, these old blogs. He wrote to WordPress, whose web platforms he used, this American firm, and said, the trouble is a lot of these old blogs I've forgotten my password, and my email account has been closed down since I opened this a few years ago. And so he couldn't actually get into these blogs to change them or close down the sentences, or take out the sentences that upset Barclay and distressed him and made him depressed. And so he did his best. He wrote to WordPress in America and said, please, if you can't give me my password and my email address, can you at the very least just take it down yourselves? And they said, no, we can't do that without an American court order. He said, well, I've got French and British court. No, it's not good enough. Wow. And then he went to the Barclay twins' lawyers and he said, look, I'm doing my best, but I just can't. I mean, I've managed to get into about 4 of the 7 blogs you took exception to. and take down some of the stuff. But there were two that he just couldn't get into. And he actually got the Barclays IT expert on the case, and he couldn't get into these blogs either. And the Barclays then wrote, or Sir David Barclay then wrote to the American web people. But they said, no, not without an American court order. The amazing thing to me is that Barclays didn't then go to the courts in America just to prolong it and run up even more absurd legal expense. But instead, what he did was, last year, he applied to the High Court in London at the end of last year to pursue the application for his committal to prison on the grounds that he hadn't obeyed the order. He hadn't taken down every single one of these blogs,
right?
Not for want of trying, but because he hadn't done it, he then went to DEFCON 1 and said, send him to jail, clap him in irons. And the judgment finally emerged a few weeks ago. The documents in this case ran to 2,900 pages, so it did take a while to go through. But anyway, Mr. Justice Spencer in the High Court said that he dismissed Barclays' application, saying that the court order hadn't been broken because the defendant had used his best efforts to deactivate the blogs. But the judge then said, even if I'm wrong, even if it is a technical breach of the order, I would not regard the breach as sufficiently serious as to justify any penalty, financial or otherwise, and certainly not such as to justify a sentence of imprisonment, even a suspended sentence. So he was basically saying, get a grip, man. Have a sense of proportion. Who breaks a butterfly upon a wheel? And so Lord de Chanson is still at large, not in the slammer, and free to drive his funny little car around London if he likes, until Barclay finds out about it and then starts suing his car or something.
Well, I was about to ask, can a car be defamatory?
I would love to see it driven into the High Court in London as the crucial defamatory document. I mean, normally, I don't know, I suppose they would photograph it from every angle. It has got an awful lot of writing on it, as I discovered when I tried to take pictures. I mean, there isn't a single corner of the car that isn't defamatory.
Is it newspaper headlines, or is it
it's his
self-penned? Oh, it's his own.
He got a car
right.
decorator, the sort of person who paints some signs on cars or company logos, to paint all these sort of mock headlines, if you like, but making certain accusations about various business activities of theirs, which we better not repeat just in case they're listening to this. But as the judge said in the case, when he was talking about Lord de Chanson, he said, he does not like them, meaning the Barclay twins. He alleges certain discreditable things in their background and conduct. So, yes, I think he does not like them would be a fair summary of his attitude to Barclays. The odd thing is that these Barclays own national newspapers, and they have always been very hostile to journalists who attempt to write about them. They have a terror of publicity. I mean, they're famously reclusive. Even though they're figures of great public interest, I mean, not merely as owners of newspapers, but as, for example, great supporters and benefactors of Nigel Farage. I mean, they hosted his 50th birthday party at the Ritz Hotel. They backed UKIP. They gave money to UKIP. So they are figures of significance in that, they played their part in the Brexit campaign, for example. But if you attempt to write about them, as I know from my own experiences, their solicitors are very quick off the mark and, if at all possible, try and shut you up.
Do you reckon we'll get any legal letters off the back of this podcast?
No, I don't think they listen to podcasts. He said, no, and I'm sure their lawyers are busy watching the cricket or the tennis or the football. They can't possibly, famous last. Oh, hang on, a solicitor has just been bringing into them. Right, that's the end of that, okay.
That's it for this week's episode of Page 94. Thank you very much to Francis Wheen and, of course, to Sarah Shannon as well. We will be back again in 2 weeks, legal writs pending, with another edition. We will see you then. Goodbye.